Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland. This week my co-host is Jay Iyer, who's an assistant professor of policy at the Barbara Jordan School. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you for having me here.
Love having you. We have three really interesting guests because we're going to talk this week about the midterm elections and also focus on Proposition A and Proposition B that the City of Houston voters are going to be dealing with. So first, I want to welcome Charles Blain, who's the Houston Director of Empower Texans. Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.
Next, Bob Stein, old friend of the show. I think Bob made his first appearance on the show 16 years ago, and he keeps coming back, so that's a good sign. He probably has a collection of every mug we ever did. He's a professor of political science at Rice University and a dear friend. And finally, Jessica Colon, who's founder of Colon & Company. He's a Republican political consultant, well-respected and very opinionated. Welcome to all three of you. Let's start with Proposition A. This is the Rebuild Houston proposition, and let Charles is the newbie. He'd never been on the show, so we'll let Charles comment first. Does your organization have a position on Proposition A? Rebuild Houston. You kind of tell what this is about. This is, as you remember, I'll give the background. There was a lawsuit. The city was deceptive in the original language. The Supreme Court agreed, so they had to come back and have a vote.
Right.
So where are you at on this, and what are you recommending?
Right. So despite the fact that even if it fails, it's not going away, we're telling everybody to vote no against it because it's, what we've seen in the past is there is no lockbox. The 5 years prior, we spent more money on street and drainage than the 7 years since its passage. So we're telling everybody to vote no because we think it's a bad idea and we don't want to give Turner, kind of approval to continue this. I think that if it goes down, there's a good chance of fighting it to get it away for good.
Charles, what you said you're telling people about no. Why don't you think it's a good idea?
Because we don't believe that there is an actual lockbox. I mean, what we've seen since its passage is that the money wasn't kept where it was, intended to be kept. We were told that it went to pay down debt instead of street and drainage, which is why we didn't spend as much on street and drainage. But the debt didn't go down as much either. I mean, I think when I was looking at the public improvement bonds, we're about on par. I know that there have been a number of newsletters out there that have said that we've been on par since when it was originally passed, so it doesn't show that it actually paid down that debt. So I just don't think it's a good idea to give approval to continue this tax collection. It's $800 million they've collected since its passage.
We'll go to Bob next.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when we actually held a vote on this.
I remember that too.
Jay may remember I polled on this, and it's one of my better polls because I was very skeptical it would pass. It only passed by the slimmest of margins. It's worth noting here that the overwhelming opposition came in the African American and Hispanic communities. And if you recall, when we were doing that poll, and I might have done it on this show, one of the things we found out was in the African American and Hispanic communities, which have been underserved and over-flooded, they had no confidence whatsoever that their flooding and drainage problems are going to be solved. So, of course, the election did not create the drainage fee, nor would this bond, or this election, Prop A, get rid of the drainage fee. So in many ways, you're exactly right. The Dropbox, the fail-safe against taking this money and using it, I think even many council members felt the money was being siphoned for other activities. The real problem is, and why I think it'll probably pass, is that we just passed, of course, a $2.5 billion bond in the county. Every time it rains, I have been polling on this issue. I don't do it for any public outlet anymore, but I can tell you that the polling I show, it's well supported, mostly because of what happened with the county and yesterday's ratings, or the show was on Friday, so it'd be Wednesday's rains. Actually drive this up. I don't think voters have any idea about the drainage fee, except those voters who voted in 2010 and voted against this, and slightly more voted for it. And those voters are coming back, but they're going to get swamped, no pun intended, by what is a heavy turnout.
Well, Jessica, are we better off with our infrastructure and drainage now than we were 10 years ago when we voted for this turkey?
Absolutely not. No, you can look around Houston, even just with the rains, the Halloween rains that we had. The streets were flooding right away. You had cars that, I know we were driving through the Heights, and some of the water was right up to the floorboards in the cars in the Heights, just with heavy rain. So no, and I think that folks who live particularly along the Brace Bayou, projects should have been moving a lot faster. We should have better streets and infrastructure in our city. Bob brings up a great point that this proposition does not get rid of the drainage fee, and there is a lot of confusion on the ballot about this. People think that this lockbox, is going to put the money away or it's going to get rid of the drainage fee. It's not, and I agree. This is a no vote on Prop A because it does not get rid of the drainage fee. It quite frankly probably puts money into a place that maybe the bureaucracies can access it even better. And if you listen to Bill King, who of course digs into the city budget very intimately, he will tell you how much of the drainage fee actually went to bureaucracy and not to our street repair.
But even if you looked at what Bill wrote, and I agree with you, he's written some very good things on this topic. If you did away with whatever lockbox mechanism you have, you're essentially giving it to the city. Is the alternative then you want to issue revenue bonds? Because we got to treat, as you said, every time it rains, it floods. So you got to do something.
I think like the other proposition on the ballot, which I'm sure we'll get to, this sounds incredibly cynical, but it doesn't matter. Whatever the voters do, it won't matter. In fact, if we vote down Prop A, the drainage fee is there, and it just means that the council can now use the money as they want.
Which is
what they're doing anyway.
Which might be more dangerous.
Let's assume for the moment that they're not doing the job they should be doing if we prefer.
Debatable.
But the bottom line is, the ones that I look at are the contractors and the engineers, and they're furious. When Steve Costello, who led this battle as a council member, he was actually running at the time for council seat and a big advocate of this, said, we're going to do this. And he talked to the engineering committee, talked to the engineers. They're furious. The projects haven't come out. They've not been timely. Flooding has, as we all know, has increased. My take on it is it's a combination of previous administrations who've been raiding it and a current administration that's under even more stress with the cap and now the pensions. But it doesn't matter. I think what will happen is, if I were cynical, I'd actually say, from the mayor's point of view, vote it down. I'll have a drainage fee.
Well, that's not what he's saying.
And then the council members have to get rid of the drainage fee. Look at the conservative Republicans on the council, Knox, Kabosh, and Travis. Will they vote to get rid of the drainage fee? No. They'll keep it and want to divert the money possibly to projects that will deal with drainage issues and flood control, but streets and roads.
But even when you do that, you have to issue some form of debt. So if you're not going to use a pay-go system, you're going to issue a debt-based system. That's essentially the argument that anyone would make, and that might make some sense. But so is that what you're asking for?
No.
You want more debt?
No, I don't want more debt. That's something we're always firmly against. What I want to do is prioritize. I mean, why did the mayor come in and hire an education director when we have all these other issues? Now, granted, that's what, $120,000 a year job, but she now has assistants and a whole department to oversee. So, you then begin to grow a budget. But why are we not prioritizing where we need to address these issues first? And we're doing things like education director, or when a few months ago over the summer, they hired I think it was a biking coordinator out of the drainage fee revenue. Why are we doing things like that? If we can prioritize where we're spending, I think that would be a better way of going about it than taking out more debt on it for drainage.
Interesting conversation. Well, we'll see what happens. My guess is, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure there'll be another lawsuit. I think that's the one guarantee we have
That's the
about that
inevitability.
topic. The other thing I can promise you is your roads are going to get worse. The drainage in the city is going to get worse. You did give credit to the county, Dr. Stein, and I think they should give credit. They were thinking we got to get projects funded. They got out there and got it done.
Remember,
so I give them credit.
One of the biggest endorsers of Prop A is County Judge Ed Emmett.
That's right.
Who is probably arguably the most popular elected official countywide.
But he's not always right.
Maybe not, but he
Should have held that election.
And we'll get to find out in a few minutes.
I think
if
he's
he
also
gets this.
counting on those monies to help him. Remember that a lot of the money in that $2.5 billion is leverage money from federal grants and city expenditures.
And that would be a good thing if they hadn't been raiding it all along.
Well,
It's been
going
on.
forward,
Look,
they need that
At the end
money.
of the day, what's been happening is the mayor and the city council have used these funds to fund runaway employment in the city and neglect infrastructure, and that's what they've done.
Well,
And you can't argue
let's be
that.
clear. When you talk about runaway employment, but let's be clear that the total number of FTEs in the city today is smaller than at any time it's been in the last 20 years. So the idea that they're using it to increase the size of city
They
government
are.
is just not.
How about $1
factually
million
correct.
for the homework helpline? That was a good expenditure of money.
So maybe we're not increasing, but we could be decreasing and not filling these positions.
Priorities.
That we're,
Because the city of Houston's getting smaller and in need of less services. So I'm not
Okay.
sure about that. Well, let's shift to the other wonderful prop that's on there, B, right?
Who wants to explain that?
Well, you can. It's inexplicable. If you look at the ballot, like, that's the rub.
What does it mean in English?
What does it mean in English? Yeah.
It's worth noting here that if you do vote and you get to the bottom of the ballot and you get to B, it's 3 pages
Correct.
of caption.
You gotta go next a
before
couple times.
you can actually vote.
It's
So
the
you
worst
have to go
written
through each screen. You don't have to read it. No one's asking you
Are you
to read
saying
it.
this is like a literacy test for voting?
It may be, but I will predict that the roll-off on Prop B will be greater than the roll-off on A.
All right, so in
no
simple
one's going to get to
terms,
B and vote for it.
Jessica, can you tell us what is Prop B?
Well, the firefighters want more money, and the city's saying we don't have it. And the city's saying if this passes, we're going to have to actually lay off firefighters to try to pay them the money that they're asking for. And the firefighters at the Texas legislature are notoriously some of the hardest negotiators on their pension. They hold the line on their pension. They have one of the largest pensions out there, and no one faults them for that. The police come in, they negotiate, they give and take, what we've seen over the years. The firefighters draw a very tough line on their pensions, and that typically has been the balance to their pay and their hours and how they work. There's a colleague of mine who frequently talks about how this really isn't pay parity, which is what the firefighters are fighting for, because it's not apples to apples what they're talking about with what their work at the fire department versus what the police department has. A captain at the fire department is not the same as a captain at the police department. So, nonetheless, they're asking for more money. A raise has been offered. They have refused. Again, very tough lines that the firefighters have. And they've taken this initiative to the voters with the worst ballot language that we've ever seen on a ballot, which I've been on some ballot props, and arguably, some have said, hey, these has been bad ballot language in the past on other things. But this is brutal to get through, and it should have been the simplest of terms if they really wanted voters to understand this at the polls.
So what happens if it passes, in your opinion, Charles?
Well, the mayor's saying he's going to have to lay off a lot of people. I think he's going to be forced to prioritize. I think there are going to have to be significant cuts elsewhere to generate enough money to pay for this increase. I know the firefighters have said, though, that it's not going to be required that this increase come in bulk. They can phase it in over time. I've heard the fire union president Marty Langton say that at various events. But I think that the mayor's it's gonna really force his hand. It's going to be a tough year because he's obviously up for election next year. So he's going to have to kind of figure out how to do this and maneuver in a way that's not going to make him look bad a year from now. So
at least go to the table in good faith and maybe negotiate with the fire union.
that
For
too.
all intents and purposes, what will matter here is a margin. Probably 3-4 weeks ago, even maybe a month ago, this was at probably 62. Then the mayor started hammering, and it's been dropping. Polling data I've seen show it's probably going to pass. The problem is if it doesn't pass over 60%, the bargaining hand of the union is going to be weakened, and the mayor is going to be right back where he was before. The bigger problem, frankly, is at what point do the courts enter into it again?
Right.
It's worth noting here, and I'll say this, that in both instances, both the Proposition A, which was, of course, about the drainage, and the false advertising on the caption, and this one is the same thing. We ought not to be making laws on the ballot. That's why we elect officials, representatives, and this is, I think, what it highlights is the total error we make in trying to make law when we go to referenda. If you don't like representative government, get rid of the representatives, but don't try to bypass it with poorly worded.
Well, Charles, let's talk about that because one of the things that's probably the argument has not been made, I think, very well is why are we using charter language to change essentially what should be a negotiation, right? This is a policy issue. Why are we gotten to a point where we're asking the citizens to come in and permanently change what is essentially the constitution for the city?
Well, because there's a failure to negotiate for the raises. I mean, they are are operating without a contract right now, and the mayor has said he's offered 9.5. The firefighters have said that wasn't offered genuinely or formally. They released a video.
It wasn't good enough, apparently.
I guess that may be what they mean, but I have to push back a little bit because I think the charter amendment mechanism is a fantastic way to implement different things in government that we see. I mean, that's why we have, we weren't talking about the property tax cap, but that's why we have the property tax cap. That's why we have a lot of good things. I think it's very important when you can't get your elected officials to do what you want. I think a charter amendment is a great way to go about it. Now, this one, it's tying the city's hands a little bit, but they got the signatures. They did it the right way. I don't see why we should push back.
I'm not certain the cap. I would argue the cap, which comes from the 1994 election when Bob Lanier got elected against Clymer Wright, and Clymer, scared the Bob Lanier bejesus out when he was running against Sylvester Turner, if you remember, in that election. And that's how we got the cap. The cap has been a disaster, and it's probably been the cause of some of the problems we're looking at now.
For goodness sake, I mean, this people keep coming to homeowners on property taxes as if it's some endless well of money. And
maybe it is for Dr. Stein.
I mean, that's where the irony that we have this
we have
education
the lowest
czar.
rate of taxation of the top 30 cities in the
You know
nation.
what, Dr. Stein,
And
people
that
are
is
being
not a
taxed out of their
virtue
homes. People
when
are
you're,
being
when you're
taxed
flooding
out of their
every
homes.
other week.
That's great
With their
in
values that are
comparison.
going up through the roof, they're being taxed out of their homes, and it's not fair. It's not fair. It's the American dream. Everybody should have home ownership, and the taxes on the property owners and going to the well again and again and again is unfair to them.
Yeah, I have a little different question. All right, so say Proposition B passes. Turner's got to go to the table, and he's threatened layoffs. But one of the things I was wondering about, you look at the work rules for the fire department, the police department, and how things are done. You ask yourself, and I love the firemen. Why do we have a fire engine that follows an ambulance? Why do we even have the ambulance service in the city at all? Why don't we outsource it? There's lots of questions I have that we could
think
do
if
this and still then pay the firemen who are fighting fires for us
How about the
what they
write-up
should
pay?
get paid.
Why is every fireman who takes a day off a boom to the other fireman who gets a write-up pay for his position? And you're absolutely right. When you have 90%, I'm exaggerating by a factor, maybe 2 or 3% of calls for EMTs and not for fire, you have a completely outmoded, not just equipment, but you also have an outmoded labor force. And one of the things that's sitting on the mayor's desk from Mayor Parker, and I guess before that even Bill White, is a manpower study. It shows that the fire department is enormously, not overstaffed, maldistribution. Right. And I think the danger the firemen risk is not winning this election, this ballot initiative by bigger than 60%. That Pandora's box is going to open up. And in fact, I think Gary picked on a very good point. Why don't we privatize ambulatory service? Now, there's a reason for that. Anybody that calls 911 by state law must be responded to. Right. But about 60% of those calls are unsustainable. That is to say, nobody has insurance to cover the $750 for the call. Who pays for that? The same way we pay for indigents who go to a public hospital in Houston because we don't have Medicaid coverage. We, the taxpayers. So one of the issues I think the mayor is going to have to look at really hard is how do you want to organize EMT and fire suppression? Fire suppression has been dealt with building codes and effective building materials. Right. But EMTs, entirely different. And we don't train and we don't build and we don't buy.
That could be an interesting result of the election that we actually get in.
I think it'll be the first thing people look at. Ambulatory services, I think it'll be the first thing that they look at to take out of the fire.
There's an opportunity here to reorganize city government in a substantial way if it in fact passes and so
more efficient,
more efficient. Right. You can certainly not just privatize, but you can essentially split it. But I will say this, having had a little bit of experience at City Hall, one of the things with the firefighters is they have walked away from deals. 9%, we talked about not too long ago, 12% earlier. In fact, the history of it has been them walking away deal after deal, whereas police have in fact dealt with
the irony here is they won't be able to, legally, they won't be able to walk away.
Right.
Because once you have a ballot initiative, they have to sit at the table and work out an agreement or they get nothing. So this is not a case where they can walk away and go back to the voters. And I think what matters here, most importantly, I think, is the margin. But I think Gary's hit on it. I think the mayor is sitting with a card in his deck that is going to be really, I think, for the firefighters, particularly the older firefighters. Younger fighters coming in are EMT trained, usually college or associate degree trained. It's the older firefighters that hold off on this. Not clear where those negotiations will end up, but my guess is the mayor will have to bring up the workforce issue.
Interesting. All right, well, it's time to move on to the biggest issue we're facing in the next week, and that's the midterm elections next Tuesday. So we'll let ladies go first. Jessica, where are we at as the show runs on? We premiere, of course, Friday night.
Right. Well, I just do want to reserve some time for rebuttal to whatever Dr. Stein is going to say.
I have no horse in the game, or bicycle.
Look, I think that the biggest underestimation of the Democrats has been Republican enthusiasm. Republican enthusiasm has been very high and matching Democrat enthusiasm. And I think that in this election, there was a lot of anticipation that this blue wave was going to come in and Democrats were just going to, deluge the polls. And Republicans have absolutely been meeting Democrats one for one, at least, and maybe a little bit more at the polls. So we are certainly already at a record-breaking midterm election. We will inevitably, by many people's estimations, have a record-breaking total midterm election. it certainly looks like we're going over 1 million votes, which is unprecedented. So the question is, who's coming? And we know R's and D's are coming, but there is a swath of folks who don't have primary voting history, and there is a swath of folks who have not voted in an election before that are coming, and everybody's wondering who they are and what they're going to do.
Nobody's wondering anymore. And I think that's, I mean, Jessica and I have been on a number of panels together. What I'm about to say has nothing to do with the poll. We know who voted. We know where they live. We know how they voted. People tend to gather in neighborhoods with other people like themselves. So all you have to ask is, who's voted? Where do they live? Are they in a Democratic state house seat, or are they in a Democratic precinct or Republican? And some of the numbers here are stunning. Let me give you an example. Between 2016 and 2018, we saw about 200,000 new voters. What's most interesting is the voters under the age of 35. They represent 28% of that new registered vote. These are people who registered in 2016, and close to 50% of them are now voting, or have already voted. They still have 2-3 more days of voting. They've already voted. 35 and under didn't vote in the 2016 election anywhere near 40%. So you're seeing young voters come out. And Jessica's absolutely right. 1 for 1. Normally in a midterm election in Harris County, Republicans have a 5 to 8 point advantage in turnout rate, and sometimes as much as 12 in 2010. She's absolutely right. They're even, but there's a big difference. The base of that vote has changed dramatically. There are fewer and fewer Republican voters in the county. They get old and they die and they leave. What's replacing them generationally are younger white, non-white voters. And that's not a question of debate. You can see their names, their addresses, their Hispanic or African American precinct location. This is not something that's unusual. In 2008, Obama won the county by 0.5 point. 2012, he wins it by 1.5 points. In 2016, Hillary Clinton wins the county by 11.5. This is a demographic shift that's been going on for 12 years. It's not a sudden. The turnout, no question, unprecedented. It's not just Democrats, it's Republicans. But this is a presidential election year. We'll probably go to 1.26, maybe 1.3. That's as many voters as showed up in 2016. Yeah. True, we have more registered voters. What happened in 2016? Every Democratic candidate in Harris County won, and Hillary Clinton took. Do I think that's going to change? I think clearly Ed Emmett could survive this, maybe one or two other, but I don't think this is going to be a good year for Republicans.
So as an under 35 black voter, I hit all the demographics
here. He assumes you're a Democrat.
Right. What's interesting is that, I've been to a number of polling locations around the county and around the town just talking to folks, and a lot of the younger people that are coming out, and I'm not going to say most, but a lot of them are looking towards Republican candidates for various reasons. We have a very diverse and youthful, for our standards, bench running this time around, whether you're looking at judicial candidates, whether you're looking at congressional, up and down the ballot. And I think that's exciting people. I mean, people that I've talked to that, I don't typically see at Republican events, that I'm just seeing in passing, or seeing, during criminal justice reform events, or whether I'm at the polling location or wherever else. A lot of these people are excited about some of the candidates that we have, and I would not be too surprised to see some of these younger voters going our way.
I would certainly say the same in Congressional District 2, where you have I think Dan Crenshaw is about 33 years old. He is absolutely the definition of a millennial voter, and decorated Navy SEAL who is absolutely turning out the vote. So we have our own rock star on the ballot, and right here in Harris County, that is out there churning out the votes in Congressional District 2.
And I would add, there's just a lot of unknowns. We make assumptions, we assume, and they could follow or not. As we know, Dr. Stein, 2 years ago, the national pollsters told us that Hillary Clinton was going to elect president and wasn't even going to be close. They turned out to be wrong. So, it's
for the record.
Not you, maybe.
For the record, my own polling in Texas was spot on, and of course Hillary Clinton did better than any Democratic candidate since Jimmy Carter. But for the record, the national polls predicted a popular vote, and they got it right. Hillary Clinton had the popular vote. The state votes were off in maybe 4 or 5 states, but the popular vote was accurate.
Just going to give you the last word here, but if we're looking at a presidential level turnout, Democrats have done well the last 3 presidential turnouts. Why wouldn't we expect the same thing here this go around?
Well, I have enormous respect for Dr. Stein. I don't think we're going to hit 1.3. I think we're going to be closer to 1.1. I think we'll definitely go north of 1 million. But I will say this, again, Congressional District 2, Dan Crenshaw running incredibly strong. Our county commissioners, Commissioner Mormon, Commissioner Cagle, running incredibly strong races. Congressman Culberson, by many accounts, should indeed hold his seat. And when you have all of that happening, and I believe Judge Emmett will indeed hold his seat, and I believe Governor Abbott is running an incredibly strong campaign here in Harris County, and I believe he will win the county. With all of that happening, it's very difficult to sit and say that the county goes blue. That's a lot of Republican-motivated votes, and that's what we're seeing and hearing amongst our travels around the county. So I believe we're in for a closer midterm than we've had before, and certainly a record-breaking turnout. But I do believe Republicans are going to have a very good election night.
Well, one thing, Jay, it's going to be interesting, isn't it?
It is going to be interesting.
And I'll be back. I don't know if you'll be back. I'll be back next week to talk about what happened and why. But I want to first thank Dr. Bob Stein. Thank you so much for coming, and Jessica Colon and Charles Blain. And as always, Jay, always a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for enjoying it.
Tune in next week. We got a lot to see. It's going to be interesting.